Hey everybody, this is Matthew Naiman with RocketStock.com, and today we're looking at Ricochet. Ricochet is a Muzzle Flash effects library from RocketStock.com. All these elements have been captured in 4K, and the pack comes with over 400 muzzle and smoke elements from over 19 unique weapons and calibers. This awesome pack works in just about any nonlinear editing or visual effects program, but let's start by taking a look at how we can use some of these elements in Adobe After Effects. Alright, here we are in Adobe After Effects. I've grabbed some great stock footage from Shutterstock.com, and we're going to be adding some muzzle flashes and smoke from the Ricochet pack. Now, I've already done a little bit of work on this comp, but we're going to focus on this main guy here, and then afterwards we can have a look at the additional work I did behind the scenes. So, I chose this shot because it presents a few different challenges. First of all, we have a moving camera, which means objects in space need to be tracked somehow. And we have a moving subject, and the tip of the gun is moving through the scene, which means we're going to have to generate some sort of track there too. Now, so we could run a 3D motion track on this footage, but I think that might be a little bit excessive. I'd probably only want to do that if we were planning on having little bullet hits on the wall here or some destruction going on. I think we'll be able to get away with 2D tracks, but we're going to need two distinct 2D motion tracks in this scene. First, we're obviously going to have to track the tip of this soldier's gun to make sure that the muzzle flashes stick to that. And it looks like we're going to have to just track the room in general, because when we lay smoke on top, we're not going to want the smoke to stick perfectly to this guy. We're actually going to want to kind of split the difference between him and the room to make it look realistic. But more on that later. Let's establish our tracks first. So you could run a 3D motion track on this footage, and actually if I unshine my layers, some of the earlier work I did was actually running a 3D motion track on this footage. As you can see, we have a track solid that sticks nicely to our wall. But I think for what we're attempting to accomplish here, it's actually a little overkill, and I'd like to show you a faster and less technically complex way to get through this shot. So let me just put that back to how it was before. One of our tracks is going to be manual, and one of our tracks is going to be automated. Why don't we run our automated track first? So what we're going to do is we're going to track the room using Adobe After Effects built-in motion tracker. Going to pop open my tracker window, and let's have a look at that a little bit bigger. So in the tracker window, first we have to have a motion source selected. That can either be footage or a pre-comp. And we have a few options: track camera, warp stabilizer, track motion, or stabilize motion. Track camera is the 3D motion tracker. We don't want to stabilize the footage, so we're going to select track motion. As you can see, it pops us into our base footage and gives us a track point. Now, a single track point is great if we're just going to be tracking positional information, but because this is a handheld shot and the camera's moving around a lot, we should probably also track rotation and scale, which gives us these two track points. Now, for a brief overview of how the track points work, this center box is the feature tracker, and this outer box is the search window. The tracker box denotes what area After Effects is actually going to track, so we're going to pick two nice high contrast spots that are a little ways away from each other, and then the search box is going to denote where After Effects bothers looking. So within a single frame, you need the search box to be big enough to contain where that spot is going to move. The camera's not moving that quickly, so we don't need too big a search box. A big search box also slows down the track quite a bit and can confuse it. So all I'm going to do is hit this play icon, and let's run the track until something inevitably goes wrong with it. Oh, something inevitably went wrong with it. So what you can see is that our lead rifle occluded our two track points. So we need to get around that. I'm going to use the page up key several times to frame back to where the last track frame was good. Looks like it was right around there, frame 190. Now we need to bypass the gun just for these few frames. So I'm going to pick two other track points, but I'm not just going to click and drag my track point off, because if I do, I will actually move that keyframe, and it'll think that that's the positional data of the track. Instead, I want to hold Option or Alt on Windows and grab the box, and let's pick that corner. You can see the keyframe data moved, but that little X hasn't moved. That means After Effects will continue using positional data from this track and applying it to that target location. Let's move our other tracker holding Alt or Option, and let's make it grab onto that section of the window there. You're free to resize the track box when you're moving to suit the feature that you're moving it to, but just make sure you're holding Alt or Option when you drag it around, otherwise you will screw up your track and then have to do this again, and no one wants to do that. Now instead of just hitting play, I'm just going to frame through the track here, make sure everything's staying glued down. I can actually see the one on the left is drifting a little bit, but I don't think it's really going to be too much of a problem, and I'm a very lazy man with other things to do. Okay, our original track points are still a tad occluded, but I prefer the way that these white spots are tracking, so I'm just going to jump back down to 2 arbitrary ones, hit play, and let's see what happens. I'm just going to zoom out so that we can continue observing our track. Beautifully, beautiful. And we hit the last frame, and we have some track data. So what do we do with this track data? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a null. Whoops, that was a shape. Don't do drugs, kids. New, null. Let's call this background track null. Let's even get rid of that capital U. I got very fat fingers. Okay, so what are we going to do with this background track null? Well, we're going to jump to our track footage. And we're going to go to Edit Target, and we're going to set the target to our background null. When I click OK, and Apply, and OK, it'll pop us back to our composition. And as you can see, our background track null has now been given tons and tons and tons of keyframes. And if we scrub through the timeline, you can see that that null stays screwed to the wall right there as if it was actually in the scene. Very cool. More on that later. The next thing we need to do is establish a track for this lead rifle. I could use the same tracking tool, but if you look at the rifle, you can see that there's really not one distinct feature that lasts throughout the entire shot for me to track. There'd be a lot of manual adjustment to the track, and it's just not worth it. So I'm going to generate yet another null. I'm going to rename this one ahead of time and call this lead muzzle null. And then I'm going to grab our null, place it on the tip of the rifle, and let's start a manual track. I'm going to press P to pop open my positional window and set a keyframe. Now, using the page up and page down keys, I can scrub through footage frame by frame. Your shortcuts may differ, but these are mine, so I will use them. I'm going to probably do this in 2 frame intervals. Page down twice, and then recenter my null. Page down twice, recenter my null. Page down twice, recenter my null. Let me fast forward through the rest of this for you so that you're not sitting here watching me slowly question every life choice I've ever made. But when I'm done, I think we'll have something pretty cool to look at. Okay, that wasn't tedious. Anyway, if I drag along the timeline, you can see now we have a null stuck to the tip of the gun. You may have some disagreements between people about whether it'd be better to automate this with the track or do it manually, but that really only took about 2 minutes, so no point in fighting with the automatic tools when doing it by yourself is that fast. Okay, now I think what we need to do is we need to just generate a little temporary muzzle flash. So let's find a frame where we can define the shape of the muzzle flash, and I'm going to generate a new shape layer. I'm going to grab my pen tool, and let's just draw a little muzzle flashy shape. Doesn't have to be good, no one's ever going to see this, and you'll see why I've done this later when I show you the work I've done ahead of time. I'm going to parent that shape layer to my lead muzzle null, and let's take a look. So now we can see what an object actually stuck to the front of the gun looks like. You can see there's no rotational or shape data because I only did a simple track, but the gun is only going to be firing, well, sideways to us, like from about there to about there, so it really doesn't matter. But what we do need to do is we do need to introduce a little bit of scale data. So I'm going to select my lead muzzle null, Hit S to twirl down scale controls, apply a keyframe, and then let's jump back to where it would be smaller in frame, about there, and scale it down till it looks about right. And now if I hit play, we see that it scales up as it gets closer to us. Fantastic. I'm also just going to call this guy Temp Muzzle Flare 01. And I'm going to start color coding stuff. I'm going to call all of our foreground muzzle flares yellow. Awesome. All right, let's start looking at the actual muzzle flares. In the Ricochet pack, we get a plethora of muzzle flares and smoke, but I've decided to go with some 7.62 by 3.9 Chinese AK footage because certainly seems like this fella has an AK. Let's take a look at some of the side footage. Shot in 4K, so we have tons of resolution to work with. Very nice and clean. Now, I don't think the clip is long enough, so what I've already done is I've gone in and I've made a subcomp that has multiple instances of the footage lined up so that we have this never-ending muzzle flash cycle, which is nice to have. All I did was offset them manually, made sure that they covered each other by at least a frame, and now what I can do in our main comp is drag that layer on top. You're going to see it's massive compared to our 1080p window. And let's just arbitrarily set the scale to 20 for now and find a frame with a muzzle flare. Perfect. Let's get that out of the way for a second, and let's actually pick our in and out points for shooting. Let's say he's going to start shooting here. I'm going to mark my footage by selecting it and hitting asterisk, and then I'm going to roll through to where I think I want him to stop shooting. Let's roll through to there and hit asterisk. That lets me know where I should be placing this layer in time, and now let's place it in space. Just like always, I'm going to hold Y, move my anchor point, and then let's flip this around by twirling down the scale controls. This little lock constrains proportions of the scale, so that means it scales up evenly. If I undo that lock and enter a negative integer, you'll see that my footage flips horizontally. Then I'll lock those together so I can scale the footage again. And then I'm just going to place that anchor point right about on the tip of the gun, scale it to where I think looks good, and then I'm going to take this pre-comp and I'm going to make sure that my lead muzzle null is the parent. Now you'll see that composition moves with our rifle. Pretty funky, right? I think it's going to start just a tad later and maybe end right about there. Then I'm also going to get rid of our gross purple temp muzzle flare. Now let's just take a quick look at where we are. So we've tracked our rifle, we've thrown our muzzle flashes in, looking okay. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to change the blending mode on our muzzle flashes. We're probably going to want to set that to add. That will knock out all the black, and it will make sure that the muzzle flash brightens up any darker area behind it. Alternatively, if you prefer the look, you could set the blending mode to screen, but I think we're going to go with an add blending mode here, and let's take a quick look. Okay, that's looking pretty cool, but I think we need to add some smoke. So there's a couple of different ways to do smoke. If someone's standing still, we could do smoke the same way that we've done the muzzle flashes. I've already built a little pre-comp that shows a smoke setup that's in a similar fashion. I've simply taken a bunch of the smoke elements and laid them out on top of each other with a screen blending mode. The problem is, this is actually going to look a little fake when we throw it into our shot. I'm going to take it in there, treat it exactly the same way that we treated our muzzle flash footage, invert the scaling, move the anchor point, throw it on the tip of our gun, scale it down, let's change the blending mode to screen, and then let's parent it to our lead muzzle null. And I assure you this is going to look very, very fake. Yeah, that looks really, really fake. The smoke should not be traveling with our guy, even if we actually put it in the right place and don't be an idiot about it. It just doesn't look quite right. The smoke emanating from the tip of the gun looks fine, but once it gets out there, it just looks wrong. So, we're actually going to do the smoke in two passes. We're going to go to our first frame of gunfire and back up our smoke right to there. Let's just make sure that's the correct length. Yep, that's perfect. And then we're going to mask out our smoke just past the tip of the gun. Then what we're going to do for a little bit of added realism is we're actually going to lay out 3 or 4 individual smoke puffs that are parented to the scene. You'll see what this does. I'm going to jump into Ricochet, smoke, grab some gun smoke. Let's scale it down. Hey, there's some smoke. Just going to treat it the exact same way. Move our anchor point. And let's find our first shot. Kaboom, right there. Let's line up our footage. Awesome. And then we're going to set our blending mode to screen, but we're going to parent this one to our background track null, so that as the smoke exits the gun, it stays in place relative to the room. We're just going to copy and paste this layer and throw in a few more. And each time we do, we're going to give it a new start position to line up with the gun. Let's make these all yellow. And let's take a look at what that's done. There you go. That looks a little bit more realistic, wouldn't you say? So that's how to add muzzle flashes to our lead person's rifle, but I'm going to jump over to a previous comp I made just to show you the work I did on the other soldiers. And here's the work I did ahead of time. I've used the exact same techniques we discussed before. Here's the section that pertained to our previous tutorial, and all I've done is taken that same technique and applied it to the other characters in the scene. I think that shows you just how convincing a little gunfight you can make using the RocketStock Ricochet packs. But if you're not trying to do something quite this complex, you can use these packs in other nonlinear editing systems, so let's have a look at Adobe Premiere. Alright everybody, we're going to dive into Adobe Premiere Pro next. So I found this awesome stock footage off shutterstock.com, and I wanted to do something with the second half of this. Let's set an in point using the I key, and let's run it through till probably about there. Set an out point with the O key, and then let's drag the footage onto our timeline. So here's our clip that we're working with. Our soldier, oh crap, something, blam, 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 going to start shooting at it with his gun. What we need to do is we need to make it clear that he's shooting, because there's nothing in this shot that really denotes that the gun is firing. What we're going to do is we're going to put some muzzle flashes right down here at the end of his gun. Now this appears to be some sort of AR-15 derivative, probably an M4. And Shutterstock in the Ricochet pack has presented us with 223 Win Armalite M4. This is actually a perfect match for that footage, and let's take a look at some of it. That's footage from the front, and this is footage from the side. Let's set an in point for it right off the top, and then let's set an out point for it right when it stops, and then let's just drag that onto the timeline. So as you can see, the footage is bigger than our base timeline. There's a very simple way to remedy that. You could highlight it, go to Effects Controls, and scale it down manually, but you can also right-click on a clip and set either scale or set to frame size. Let's place this in the correct spot and at the correct time. The first thing I'm going to do, just so we can see what we're doing, is set our blending mode to screen. I'm also going to scale the footage down. And I'm going to click our box for wireframe controls and move it to just about the right spot. I'm also just going to move the anchor point over to the muzzle just because I like to. I think that looks a little big, so I'm probably going to scale it down more. And you can see because we've moved that anchor point to where the muzzle is, now it scales in and out from that point as opposed to from the center of the clip. Let's now pick a frame, which is the first frame that he pulls the trigger. Let's say right there. He probably wouldn't start pulling the trigger till he was on target. Let's throw our footage in the correct spot there. And you'll see that as I hit play, the footage does not stay in the correct spot. It's also not the correct length. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to copy that footage. Whoops. Copy that footage, paste it onto the correct layer, And let's make sure that we have a seamless clip the correct length. Then, so that we have one clip to work with, first I'm going to set both of their blending modes back to normal. I'm also going to nest the clips together. So a nest is basically like a subcomp, and I'm going to call this Muzzle Flash Nest. So what you'll see is that we have both clips joined together into one sequence. And if I want to make changes to them, I can double click on it and it'll open up those two clips as a separate sequence with all the effects we've applied to them preserved. So now that I have this one clip, I can go ahead, select my motion, select my wireframe. I can reset my anchor point, put it in the right spot, and now let's get down to business. I'm going to have to manually track this muzzle flash to the end of his rifle because Adobe Premiere lacks any tracking tools. But for something like this, we can get quite a good track established with minimal work. I'm going to set our blending mode back to screen just so that we can see what we're doing. Pick a frame, set the anchor point right to the muzzle, and click position. Now using the arrow keys, left and right, I'm going to jump to the next muzzle flash and move it to the correct spot. I'm going to keep skipping through frames and moving my muzzle flare to the correct spot, stepping through the frames with the arrow keys. I'm going to fast forward this bit for you guys so you don't have to watch me do all of this tedious work. Getting there. Hurry it up, me from an hour ago. And we're back. As you can see, I've keyframed the position of our muzzle flash nest so that it stays attached to the muzzle of the gun. However, I see that there's a slight dip in the gun, and I think those muzzle flashes would actually be pointed a little bit more downwards. So I'm going to go to the beginning of that section, set a rotation keyframe, jump forwards a few frames, and let's rotate the muzzle flash down a bit, and you'll see that it rotates around the anchor point that we set. Looks like it's still pointed down a bit there and doesn't really tilt up again until there, so I'll set another rotation keyframe, and then by the end we'll probably have that set back to 0, and let's take a look. Alright, looking pretty cool. But we can do a little bit better than that. Now that we have our muzzle flash element prepped, I'm going to set the blending mode to add so that it actually appears a little bit stronger against that background. And I'm going to double it up, copy and paste it. Let's throw it back on top of itself. And as you can see, our color's getting a little too strong here. I'm going to set that to a screen, and I'm going to apply a blur to it. So that blur should act like a little bit of a glow on the muzzle flash, just to make it look a little bit more intense and like there's a little bit of interactive lighting going on. Let's take a peek at how this is looking. Hey, that's looking pretty good. The other thing I'll say is that dumping a magazine like that's probably going to generate quite a bit of smoke. So I'm going to jump down into our Ricochet pack and have a look at our smoke. As you can see, we have a lot of different options to choose from. Putting in one for every single gunshot would probably take quite a bit of time. So what I've done here is I've taken 4 smoke clips and laid them out in a staggered sequence above our footage. Now what I can do is I can nest these 4 clips. Should have renamed that sequence. Always rename your sequences. A tidy project is the result of a tidy mind. Smoke nest. What that lets us do is take our 4 smoke bursts, copy and paste them, continue stacking them in an offset fashion until we have roughly enough for our shot. Yeah, we got lots of smoke bursts going here. You'll also notice that they don't really trail off properly, so we probably want to make sure that these all run their full course so they don't cut themselves off. Perfect. Back within our main effects comp, we can now speed up this comp to 200%. See if that's about the right speed. Maybe a little fast. Let's set that down to maybe 150. Nope, too slow. That'll probably work. And then right wherever the last round is fired, that was the last one. Let's jump in and delete all of our smoke comps after that point so that we don't have any phantom smoke puffs. And now we're free to scale this correctly and put it in the right place. Oh, we're going to scale our comp down. Let's set up our wireframe so we can see what we're doing. Let's scale our comp down. Let's set our anchor point, and let's put it in roughly the right place. What we actually want to do is just kind of keep the smoke fairly loose and also throw a mask on it. We're going to click on the Create Ellipse Mask button and then drag our mask to roughly the right spot. And this mask, once feathered, by dragging up our feather amount, by using this feathered mask, we won't see the hard edges of the clips that we're using as stock. So let's have a quick look at that. There you go. Looks like those muzzle flashes are generating some smoke and didn't really take that much work. Alright everybody, today we're going to finish up in Final Cut Pro, so I've grabbed some different stock off of shutterstock.com. Let's take a look at it. I found this clip of this lady sitting on the street giving us some finger guns. So, what can we do with that and our elements from the Ricochet pack? Well, I went and I grabbed an awesome shot of a 308 Winchester firing. As you can see here, those particular firearms have some pretty powerful muzzle blast. Just to see what I'm doing, I'm going to set it to screen mode so I can have a look through it. Perfect. And we're going to find a frame that we like for her to shoot. How accurate was I? I was a little early. Boom. Right there. She shoots. And generally, a muzzle flare would only last for one frame, but I think we're going to give it a couple of extra frames on this just so that we have some time to see what's going on. And I also think, unlike a real muzzle flare, we're going to track this with her hand a little bit. So to do that, I'm going to enable my wireframe mode so I can drag around my muzzle flare clip. And I'm going to find my start frame, set a positional keyframe, jump ahead a few frames, set another positional keyframe, and then, just so that it doesn't look like an image stuck to her finger, I'm also going to give myself a rotation keyframe and a scale keyframe. I'm going to jump forwards a couple of frames, and let's give it some rotation, and let's scale it up a little bit, and then let's cut it off right there. And let's see generally how that looks for now. We're not done. Hey, looks like a little muzzle flare coming out of her finger. Awesome. Now, because we're going for a slightly more cartoony, fanciful look here, people don't actually shoot things out of their fingers, why don't we give it a little bit of a tint? Let's go with a nice kind of fuchsia. Make it really stand out there. And I'm actually going to copy and paste this guy on top so that we have about double the density, but I'm also going to take off all of its rotational keyframes and then maybe select a directional blur. There you go. So now we got this kind of sci-fi muzzle flare on top. And I think it'd be kind of fun if maybe the power of her particle beam finger was enough to sort of distort her actual world. So we're going to pick her clip. And first let's throw in a little radial blur. Let's turn it down to 0 and center that on her finger. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to track through our footage and keep the blur centered on her finger. Perfect. Next, we're going to keyframe the actual blur amount. So we're going to drop a keyframe next to amount, chug through our footage, and maybe right there, yeah, the world's getting a little zany. And within a few frames after the muzzle flare's gone, let's have the world go back to normal. Kaboom! Let's actually make her world shake a little bit. The shot's so powerful we get a little concussive effect. I'm going to throw a keyframe on the position, skip forwards to the end of it, keyframe the position, but in between we're going to go a little nuts on the position. Let's crank her down a little bit. Over to the side a little bit. And then here, let's crank it the other way, maybe up a little bit. And then just so that, I'm also just going to trail off the motion just a little bit. And then just so that we can't see the edges of that, I'm also just going to scale it up ever so slightly. Don't think we'll see any real difference there. Kaboom! Look at that. Sci-fi finger guns. And for an added hint of realism, why don't we grab some of our gun smoke. Let's throw it on top. Probably going to want to start with it actually about there, because we're not going to want to speed it up too much and make it look unnatural. We want to make sure that starts right when our clip starts. Let's change our blending mode to screen. And let's make sure it's in the right place. Amazing. And just so it matches everything, let's give it a little bit of a tint. Let's make it a little fuchsia. Maybe turn down the opacity a little bit. Kaboom! That does it for me. Seems to make her pretty happy too. I'm alright with that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this brief look at Shutterstock's Ricochet pack, and maybe even learned how you can use these elements to make your projects that much better. Shutterstock has thousands of VFX and stock clips that you can use in your projects, and we'll be here to help you get the most of them. On behalf of Shutterstock, this is Matthew Naiman saying see you next time.